A key reason why al-Muslimin endured losses against Muawiyah was that the people of Syria and stuff weren't making the efforts towards victory. They weren't supporting the cause emotionally. They didn't realize what big of a deal it was to make Al-Quran the standard of their judgment. We must not excuse things that happened after Muhammad died, because these people knew Muhammad. And that, of course, refers to a lot more than just some of the battles when Ali was Caliph. Prophet Saleh was said to have preached from the age of 16 to 120. And when the storm hit his people, they had still not abandoned their worship of other than God. His camel that followed him from the rock was killed by Qidar bin Salif. I'm not sure which S. I'm only having English letter here, because it's... And his people were called Thamud because they were the descendants of Thamud bin Amr bin Sam. Some of that son of stuff is actually along the lines of they're just from that lineage or tribe. It can skip generations linguistically when you see that. We should think of what stands in the way of people doing right. We shouldn't support people just because they are succeeding in some material terms. وَأُودِعَ الْكِتَابُ فَتَرَى الْمُجْرِمِينَ مُشْفِقِينَ مِمَّا فِيهِ وَيَقُولُونَ يَا وَيْلَتَنَا مَا لِهَذَا الْكِتَابِ لَا يُغَادِرُ صَغِيرَةً وَلَا كَبِيرَةً إِلَّا أَحْصَاهَا وَوَجَدُوا مَا عَمِلُوا حَاضِرًا وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. When it finally comes down to it, the scripture of our age will be placed before us, and the contents of it, those who've gone against those contents, they won't want to witness this. And everything small or big will be in this book. Okay, I misspoke slightly. The book refers to the book of our deeds. So see, we have this idea of these different books, and it is very much Quranic. The book of ourselves. So let us be the sort of individual that because of our adherence to the Book of God, is someone that we're going to want to become fully aware of our book of self. And the people who call towards hell are not those who criticize the scripture thumping, the scripture shielding individuals. Oh, I have a book of scripture, don't attack me, or don't defend yourself against me. Quran calls to make peace before the battle rather than hold it up in the battle. And now, you don't go around calling people Bible thumpers or whatever because, you don't come up with insulting nicknames, but, the concept is that you shouldn't be somebody that you should be somebody that uses the scripture in terms of your own beliefs, not bringing it out to reference it against people. And regardless of what the people's support seems to be at the moment, be steadfast. And sometimes you can rally the people behind you. And we need to remember that jihad, when it becomes a fight, it's not what people criticize more, other than the people who are, it's a struggle. Okay, then you're lazy. Your criticism of the whole thing is your own laziness. That's it. That's the entire crux of the matter. Yawma yuhma alayha fi nar jahannama fatukwa biha jabahum wa junubuhum wa zahuruhum hadha ma kanaztum li anfusikum fadhuqu ma kuntum taknizun. And the divine help does come. And those who focus on their numbers as a source of pride, that often ends up weakening them. And then that can be very much a retreat. Certainly battle is one of those occasions that each needs to try to their utmost. And when al-Muslimin get together and fight in the cause of God, rather than just in the name of God, or some thing where it's just Muslim against non-Muslim, they end up getting that angelic support. And rather than forced conversions, you find out that Hunain, Khaybar, Khandak, all these were about protecting the rights of themselves and others, restoring freedom. And rather than this thing that some of the non-Muslims try to put forward, Muhammad's whole life, there were people, his whole life as a prophet, there were people out there who would have wanted to have killed him. He made the announcement, they made a joke, but once he started to get followers, people wanted to kill him. up until his last days, there was people that, if they got the opportunity, but then again, there was people who they didn't want the revenge, but if they got the opportunity to get away with it, they would have done it. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. And we need to remember of the truth through deeds of the true believers that have asserted their belief in God and His messenger. And their striving is in regard to the hereafter. So, let us remember that jihad is something of doing what is right, what is best, even when it is difficult. And let us not ever doubt the truth that has come to us. Abd bin Kawa was a leader of the Khawarij, and he specifically was against Ali, and that, of course, as we know from Sunni narrations and Shia narrations, is that those who are the enemies of him, well, they're the disbelievers. And somebody, of course, somebody who outwardly accepted Islam during the life of Muhammad, that certainly has more merit than them waiting till after Muhammad died. But that doesn't mean we are, of course, excusing everything that anybody like that did. There's nothing in the Quran that says that. Those who were forgiven for what they did at Badr or did before, or Uhud, or whatever you're going to say about that sort of stuff, you can't make the point that they're preemptively forgiven for everything. Zeus Sadia was killed in the Battle of Nahrawan with lightning, and Muhammad had previously said that he was going to die. And so the Khawarij that were defeated at that time. Now, one of the things that people bring up is these various groups that either deviated to the point to have problems in belief, or did stuff even to the point where you could say that at least some of them had left the fold of Islam because of what they did to the Muslims, or their approach to those which Abdul Basir was also one of those ones that you couldn't make exaggeration of. You couldn't be the enemy of. You had to be on their side. That was part of being a believer. And we see from Nahjul Balaghah that Ali seemed to have thought that, the way Ali was towards Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, it seemed that applied to them too, because he never was an enemy to certain people of the community. He, spoke to them and tried to address things, but he never became an enemy of them. And but we got to be careful of who we choose to be enemies of anyways. We got to be careful of those who, what we say about people, and not exaggerate their statuses. And the battles that happened amongst al-Muslimin the sects that occurred, these peoples were victims of themselves. The people who fought over, such things have even arisen that some people have issued fatwas encouraging killing of Muslims. If somebody is legally Muslim, they're legally Muslim. And if they're not, well, that's not the thing too. I mean, it does give us a bad name when people are praying to other than God and they're claiming to be Muslims. Like, oh, well, that's just a different type of Muslim where they pray to saints and angels. It's like, no, that they're not Muslim at all. It doesn't matter how much Quran they say or whatever. If they are actually saying their prayers to other than God, the dead people and the animals and stuff like that, or whatever they're doing. Now, some things aren't like that. They're like, okay, you can greet the people, you can say hello to the inhabitants of the graveyard or something like that, but you don't, the intercession that's mentioned in the Quran is not you pray to somebody and then that person goes and intercedes. Because obviously that's what the idol worshippers and the Christians and all these other people are doing, is they're praying to them to make the deal. And the idea that, it's shirking from monotheism if they do it, but if we do it, no, doesn't make sense linguistically, doesn't make sense otherwise. The Quranic passage about the people of the cave, the people who divided into sects, and the approach that some people have to it is like, it mentions that the people who divided into sects and started murmuring and all that, they built the shrine. It doesn't say that the people who got the lesson of the story built the shrine, because it was beyond the numbers and all that stuff. And speaking of Isfahan, there's something in the comment here that I'm looking at. The people of Isfahan, well, there has to be a certain number of Jews towards the end of the time there, and there is the 70,000 Jews in Isfahan. So that fulfills a requirement there. And Bakht Nasa was the ruler of Babel, Iraq, in 600 BCE. And speaking of Iraq, I forget exactly where it was, but there was the biggest seed depository in the Muslim world. And countries that are Muslim majority. And one of the first things that America destroyed in the war, rather than going straight for that and conquering the leader who the war was supposedly about, they destroyed a seed depository. So, and like they're making it so that farmers can't use the regular seeds and they're going to replace them with GMOs or something. I mean, they almost entirely have, but one very questions that. Belshazzar came to power. Charis was another ruler of them. And, Kurash. Kurash would have been Cyrus. So he was a just ruler over the people, over the children of Israel. And he allowed people their freedom of religion, or freedom not to be as part of a religion. Barakna fiha wa tammat kalimatu rabbikal husna la bani Israila bimma sabaru wa damarna ma يصنع فرعون وقومه وما كانوا يعرشون. And sometimes the people that gain control over a piece of land end up being those who weren't thought of as very important in history. As much as there's a lot of information about it, the early people that you could call Jews, before the historical mention of Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism could be said to have occurred about 200 BCE, in the period before the second book of Maccabees. And of course, Judaism was kind of shaped by a war chronicle, just like what people call Hinduism. But Hinduism didn't remain, it ended up being the religion of the land in terms of, the British called a bunch of different religions Hinduism. And so different factions have become more popular at different times. There's been revivals of, let's turn to the four Vedas, or this set of Puranas, or this set of Upanishads. And yeah, the numbers are different with that sort of thing, but that's sort of a side note. And it wasn't called Palestine. It wasn't called Canaan. It wasn't called Phoenician. I mean, there are people who called them that. Plishtin is an insult. Philistine is still an insult in some circles in the Western world, but it relates to something a lot more serious. The wallowers for the she-Satan, Tiamat. The ton is Tiamat. And how some died in the whole transfer of the Israelites, because they were arrogant. They rode out there and got stuck. People got stuck, and there's a pharaoh who has salt. There was a pharaoh that drowned in one of the tidal marshes. And sometimes things take centuries for a people to learn. One of the things in America is that, when equal rights came, people who accepted that did better with their lives. Not only their approach to what they have, but other people. And it's like, honestly, people of all colors or whatnot are poor. It doesn't have much to do with anything. And some of the issues that occur in a lot of the Islamic commentaries is something that we need to address. And one of them is, if you find no conflict with the Quran, you can accept the narrations of the children of Israel. And it's like, well, what entirely does that mean? Is it just the story verses? No, it's some of the scientific side. So sometimes people just went along with, it's said, and we don't have, the Quran calls towards certain evidences that we should look into. And so let's not fall into the thing where we are commenting just because some other religious tradition brings this stuff up. We are not turning to the claimed remnants of prophets before Muhammad for our guidance, our right and wrong, what we're supposed to do with our rituals or meditation, or however you're going to phrase all that stuff. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet are very detailed in their things, and one should help people towards knowing what those things are. And humans get impulses to rebel when they consider themselves without needs. And we are in need of others being there who know and understand things. And it doesn't mean we can't trust ourselves. We don't have to be conservatives and say, oh, well, we must accept the interpretations of others rather than looking at things for oneself. We should feel a sense of devotion and servitude when we are doing the right thing. We shouldn't only do things out of fear or authority. That could be where it starts, but we're supposed to develop a spirit of worship beyond just, you know, the letter of things. Now, it's important to show what is right and wrong. It is important to work towards an experience of confirming the prophethood. But it's not just about experience generating. When a people does have to be fought, it's not that, oh, well, we got enough of them, you know. And we take the lessons of what happened with previous peoples. Sometimes they were punished through other people. Sometimes the consequences among themselves took them under. Sometimes the bodily or environmental or material consequences got to them. And sometimes they face disasters, which are going to hit areas. They're going to hit areas. But then there are going to be those that, regardless of any difficulty, they're going to have the affection, and they're going to try to, among themselves, and they're going to try to work out what is right among them. They're not going to be of those who tried to get away with what they were trying to get away with. In my country, one of the things that we have is this idea that we can do what we want with our bodies, and if it involves the public, certainly the public funding and all that stuff, we got to step aside from this idea that we can just justify it because we can. And if it's, of course, something that involves multiple people, then the permission of multiple people needs to be involved too. And I don't just mean in terms of the funding. إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات والخاشعين والخاشعات والمتصدقين والمتصدقات والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات وعد الله لهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما. And وقالوا نحن أكثر أموالا وأولادا وما we need to remember to pair up upon the good qualities of deeds and consciousness. And this is the way to forgiveness and reward from God. And in the second verse, we are reminded of the contrary way. The people who have a lot of wealth are at least just more than oneself or one's country or whatever. And those who are richer in terms of their progeny. People like this have had to face the consequences of their deeds. Let's remember to avoid frivolity. Because frivolity leads to pride. A laziness that we can waste time gives ground for Satan to become active in the human being. A couple more verses. Sabunanamanumedum be'ememalinwabanin Dusare Allahum vil qayrate balayashurun. And God is ever giving people opportunity. But people have this false perception that they're being favored in life is known by the sort of variety of worldly things which they have. This world is a means towards the next life. And we need to not pass on this guidance. You can say that this is a thing going on here or there, but, when you see me mention that these people believed or did this, it's to illustrate the point. It's not to encourage you towards what is un-Islamic. Don't be proud of what you have done. Work towards what you could do in the future. Keep the bad influences at a distance. Realize that it's not like in Anatole France's book. God will always have the overreaching ability in his followers alone.